So the next speaker is a senior at Berkeley, studying linguistics and East Asian studies. His passion for exploring and learning different Asian languages is reflected through his tumultuous relationship with Chinese calligraphy. From initial indifference to ultimate admiration, he slowly learned to embrace and view calligraphy as an innovative outlet to both express himself and his creativity. By sharing his unique and personal narrative with us today, he hopes to inspire more people to pursue an uncertain path, to embrace innovative self-expression, and cultivate unexpected passions along the way. Please welcome Jenkin Leung.
Hi, good afternoon everyone. I'm Jenkin, or my Chinese name is Jenkin Leung, and I'm a senior year majoring in linguistics and Southeast Asian studies. I'd like to first thank Carol for inviting me to give a speech here, and she specifically told me not to speak Thai or Sanskrit, so I wouldn't do that today. I'll just speak English or Chinese. Yeah, and I decided to instead share about experience with Chinese calligraphy instead of linguistics today, because I feel like it's a better connection with my audience. So my calligraphy journey started with my mom enrolling me in lessons when I was 11, and I'll just do my slides. Yeah, thanks. Because she thought it would take a rambunctious child like me, and more importantly, improve my Chinese handwriting. Like every other good Chinese kid, I complied with her orders and went to class, but I paid no attention to what I was learning. I did the bare minimum in class, copying my teacher's handwriting without seeking improvement, and submitting entries for competitions, no matter how hideous my works were. Yeah, so that was the mess that I made. Can you guys actually hear clearly? It's fine, right? Okay. So my indifference with calligraphy went on for quite some time until I was in secondary 4. That year, my teacher picked several students to each write a 大字, literally a big word, for an exhibition, and I was chosen. Since it was displayed in public and I had to sign my name on it, I basically practiced more than usual, and the resulting work was better than I expected, so I took a picture with it. It's basically shan in shan ruo shui in Laozi. And after a few days, having realized that I do Chinese calligraphy, a shixiong, a term that we use for a senior student, he approached me. As a chairman of the calligraphy society at school, he wanted me to be his successor, since virtually no one but me had experience in Chinese calligraphy. I quickly explained that I was inapt for the position, as the quality of work in that picture was only possible because of weeks of practice. He promised that I would be fine, and it was only administrative duties that the chairman had to take care of, including weekly club meetings, which were basically lessons with our teacher advisor, and occasional exhibition of members' works. After several more reassurances from him, I agreed to take up the post, despite fear still lingering. He then introduced me to the vice chairman of the club, a shidi of ours, who was already appointed to be chairman after my turn because of his experience with calligraphy. In a public competition that I later joined, and of course I lost because of my skill in calligraphy, my shidi and shixiong were the champions of the senior and junior categories. So you can see that it's guanjun. And here's a closer look at their works. It's magnificent, I know, very breathtaking. And when I realized that my predecessor and successor were the best out of all students in Hong Kong, I started to worry, as I was nowhere near their level, and that no intensive training could bring me near that level in just 3 months' time before I became the next chairman. Still, I practiced as much as possible, for I didn't want to disappoint my shixiong and get slighted by other members of the club. Having never received training in ballpen calligraphy, 硬笔书法, I asked my shixiong to assign me homework in ballpen calligraphy so I could follow his handwriting and improve mine based on his corrections and feedback. Unfortunately, but as I had expected, no matter how much time and effort I devoted into practicing calligraphy, my handwriting was far from the level of my shixiong. This was a practice that he gave me. Just a sec. And mind you, it's actually handwritten, not printed. That's the level of calligraphy that he has. And this was a mess that I made. Yep, a lot of corrections, as you can see. And I think I just started learning ballpen calligraphy for a month at that point. But it was soon September, and I was officially the chairman. My first task was to publish a recruitment notice, which had to be handwritten rather than typed, in line with the club's tradition. I tried to emulate the handwriting of my shixiong, but I was immediately embarrassed, even before finishing the first character. Still, I gave my very best. But despite giving my very best, I was faced with immediate rejection when I showed my notice to him. I resented myself for not being good enough, but also I felt hopeless and helpless, as there was no way I could be good enough in that period of time. Eventually, I asked and basically begged my shudi to write the notice for me instead. And this was the notice. In the meantime, I continued to copy the handwriting of my shixiong, and my stress exacerbated when I kept comparing my handwriting to his and realizing it was impossible for me to catch up. During the weekly meetings, I would see some members write better than me as they were more experienced. Through constant comparison, my confidence was chipping away to a point of paranoia. I started to think that everyone was staring at me every time I made a stroke, and that my teacher advisor was secretly comparing me to my shixiong and shudi, ridiculing at my incompetence. I became so paranoid and insecure that when my Chinese teacher asked me to write my name, my hand shivered. Then came the exhibitions in October. It was a custom for the chairman to post his works on a board in a corridor where everyone at school passes through. And these were some of the works that my shixiong and shudi did the previous year. Yep, it's all handwritten instead of printed. He is honestly the best calligrapher that I have actually met. So with that standard in mind, juxtaposed with my handwriting at that point of time, my confidence crumbled even further. But like Lin Haiyin in 爸爸的花儿落了, I think many of you have read that article. 我虽然很害怕, 但是也得硬着头皮去. So during the week before the exhibition, the first thing that I did when I went home was to practice calligraphy, which was often last till 2 in the morning as I would arrive home at 11 after tutorial classes. I kept writing, but it was rubbish that I was just making the whole time. I was writing one day, and I suddenly felt an itch on my palm, which then spread throughout my whole body. I was developing hives, and my parents and I just thought that it was the dust, but in retrospect, it probably was the stress. The day to post my works finally came. I purposely did not stamp my name on my works, which was a no-no in Chinese calligraphy, but I did not want anyone to know that it was me who wrote them. For the entire period of the exhibition, all I could think of was just how students and teachers laughed at my works, especially having in mind the breathtaking ones by my shixiong. It was as if a child was forced to run on the sports ground without knowing even how to crawl, and all the spectators were booing at him. I knew I was unhappy from the comparison that I made in my mind, but I didn't know how much it was bottling up until a conversation with my mom. So one morning, I was rushing her when we left home, and she asked what was wrong with my attitude, since I never did that. When she snapped at me, I just couldn't control myself and I burst into tears, telling her that I accidentally missed the calligraphy meeting the day before, and my teacher advisor probably hated me for that. I rambled on in tears how everything I did at the club was a failure, and how I would never amount to much, since it was impossible for me to catch up with the mastery that my shixiong and shudi acquired through 10 years of time. It was only when I uttered those words in that episode of hysteria that I realized how miserable and suffocated I actually felt from the comparison. After my term of being a chairman, all I could associate with a calligraphy brush was my incompetence and my constant disappointment to others. I had only fear and aversion for calligraphy. So I told my mom that preparation for public examinations was taking up too much time, and I had to take a break from calligraphy lessons. Little did I know that wasn't the end of my calligraphy journey. Because of COVID, like a lot of international students, I went back home and studied remotely. I bumped into my calligraphy teacher with whom my sister was still studying, and he asked me whether I had completed 续笔赋, which I should have submitted to him years ago. I decided to pay my debts once and for all. After my semester ended, I started on this piece of work, and this is 后续笔赋 that I wrote. So since I was writing at home, sometimes I got distracted and started doodling. I was interested in linguistics, especially in writing systems, so I started scribbling some kana, the Japanese script. So that's a haiku that I did. And you can see that it's very Japanese-styled calligraphy, as opposed to Chinese style that I wrote previously, like this one. And without anyone to guide me and without any master's handwriting to follow, I broke free from the practice of copying off others' handwriting and wrote however I desired. It was at that moment I experienced a fresh sense of freedom, 随心所欲, if you will. I was previously confined in boxes, and quite literally boxes of exercise books, but it was not the only thing that stifled me. In the past, I was doing calligraphy for the sake of others, under the behest of my mom and under the request of my 师兄, so that there was always an expectation to meet. But I am now doing calligraphy just for myself, solely for my entertainment. It was this change in perspective that freed me from the constant comparison that I troubled myself with. I decided that authentic rather than aesthetic was the priority of my works. And by authentic, I mean writing without embellishments of specific strokes, reflecting how I actually felt at that moment I was creating my work. And I'm now happy to share my works with others, like what I did during Chinese New Year. So you can see that it's 传书非混论, written in both the Vietnamese Chữ Nom, which is a democratic script, which says chúc mừng năm mới in Viet. And I think that as I broke away from what calligraphy is said to be under the traditional Shu Dao paradigm, and came up with how I think calligraphy should be, which is 求真 and 虚心, I'm able to find happiness and comfort in calligraphy. I'll end with a quote that I modified from Zhuang Zi. 无迹也有涯, 而书道也无涯, 以有涯习无涯, 已矣. And I guess a lot of you know where this is from. So what I'm saying is, it's unwise to want to attain a goal that is unattainable with one's limited skills, where we can do best to express ourselves to the fullest and in the most authentic way possible. This should be the essence of calligraphy innovation in connection to today's theme, and even in life. Thank you. Do we have time for questions?
Yes. Okay. Any questions from the audience?
Thanks for sharing. And my question would be, like, we always say 见字如见人, or when we write 见字如面, when we, like, write our letters or something. So, do you think it's a kind of symbol of calligraphy for, like, personality or characteristics or any personal stories, relationship between calligraphy and as a person? Yeah.
Right. I love that question because I wanted to incorporate that, but I didn't have enough time. So I think to a certain level of mastery of the strokes, you start to see that it reflects your character, but you would have to do calligraphy for at least, like, I'd say 5 to 10 years before that actually emerges. And for me personally, in the 硬笔书法 that I did, I felt that at a later stage of life, like I think this year or last year, as my character started to mature and looked at things holistically rather than actually small parts of things like an event, the 格局 of my whole word is actually much stronger, and instead of just the specific strokes that I was caring about. So I guess it does reflect your character in a certain way. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Bruce.
Hi there. Thank you so much for this honestly, it was a very insightful talk. And as someone who has known what it's like to be thrown into a world with high expectations, I really resonated with that particular line of like a child being told to run when it didn't know how to crawl and everyone laughing. And I thought, you know, to myself, it's really inspiring how you managed to find your way out and figure out like how to do something for yourself and find passion in it for you. So what was the particular moment for you that you felt like, yes, like this is how I want to do things, it's going to be for myself, and I'm going to focus on authenticity?
Right. I think it's, if I had to describe it, it's almost serendipitous. Like, I didn't expect that to happen, but as I was just scribbling the Japanese script that you saw, I felt that it was a fresh sense of freedom, and there was no one to tell me what to do, like to confine me in boxes. So that's why I decided that, oh, I probably should do this because it makes me happier instead of suiting others' expectations. Because I feel like in the past I didn't prioritize my happiness and I prioritized others' expectations, which I think a lot of you would resonate. But that's what I want to tell, like with my story. Think about your happiness, and also it might bring you unexpected surprises. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your experience with us.